I want to tell you about a case that seems simple at first. A young woman was found dead on a beach in Scotland, and police quickly ruled it a suicide. But if that's true, why were parts of the investigation kept secret? And the deeper you look into this case, the more questions it raises. So what really happened to Annie Börjesson? Annie was 30 years old and originally from Sweden. In 2005, she was living in Edinburgh, where she had moved to improve her English and build a life abroad. She was intelligent and independent and had built a quiet life for herself. She went swimming several times a week and was looking forward to spending Christmas with her family back in Sweden. She had already begun preparing for the trip. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until one evening when Annie met a man who introduced himself as Martin Leslie, a well-known Scottish rugby player. They spent some time talking, and at first, Annie had no reason to doubt who he was. But as the evening went on, his behavior began to make her uncomfortable. At one point, the man bought her another drink. Annie accepted it, but chose not to drink it because she hadn't seen it being prepared and didn't want to take the risk. Later, she told her mother that there had been something about the man that genuinely frightened her. What Annie didn't know was that the person she had met wasn't Martin Leslie at all. The real rugby player was in New Zealand at the time, meaning someone had deliberately used his identity for reasons that remain unknown. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a bizarre encounter with a stranger. But just a few days later, something happened that made Annie believe it hadn't been a coincidence. She went to the swimming pool she regularly visited, a place she had never told this man about. Yet as soon as she walked inside, she saw him again. From that moment on, the people closest to her noticed a clear change in her behavior. She began telling her family that she believed someone was watching her. She became convinced that her phone calls were being monitored, and instead of using her mobile phone, she sometimes called her parents from public payphones because she believed they were safer. She even asked her brother whether it was possible for someone to remotely access her computer and see what websites she had been visiting. Her family tried to reassure her, believing she might simply be stressed or overthinking the situation. But Annie seemed genuinely convinced that something wasn't right. Despite all of this, life appeared to go on as normal. She paid her rent, renewed her swimming membership, arranged to visit her hairdresser when she returned to Sweden, and packed for Christmas. Nothing suggested that she was preparing to disappear forever. If anything, her plans pointed in the opposite direction. She fully expected to return to Edinburgh after the holidays. Then, on December 3rd, 2005, Annie left home. Before arriving at the airport, Annie tried to withdraw money from an ATM, but the transaction was declined due to insufficient funds. This became the last confirmed record of her movements before she reached the airport. When she finally arrived at Prestwick, security cameras captured her walking through the terminal. She didn't check in for a flight or spend much time inside. The footage also raised another question. People who watched it, including those who knew Annie personally, said she looked different when she returned to the main terminal area. Instead of appearing calm, she looked anxious, distracted, and visibly frightened, as though something had happened during the few minutes she had been out of sight. No one knows what happened during those missing minutes, who Annie may have spoken to, or what caused such a dramatic change in her behavior. What is known is what happened next. Instead of boarding her flight to Sweden, Annie left the airport and headed toward the coast. Later, a witness reported seeing a lone figure standing near the shoreline. The person was too far away to identify. The following morning, on December 4th, Annie Börjesson's body was discovered on the beach. Police quickly concluded that she had walked into the sea and taken her own life. To investigators, the case appeared straightforward. But Annie's family refused to accept that explanation. The more they looked into what had happened during Annie's final days, the less the official version seemed to make sense. When Annie's body was returned to Sweden, the undertakers who received it noticed several bruises that, in their opinion, appeared to have been inflicted before she died. Those injuries had not been described in the original Scottish post-mortem report. There were also marks around her neck, which investigators believed could have been caused by objects in the sea after her body entered the water. Microscopic freshwater algae, known as diatoms, were reportedly found in some of Annie's internal organs. This immediately raised questions because Annie's body had been recovered from the sea. The family argued that if those findings were accurate, Annie may have entered freshwater before her body ended up in the ocean. Another detail shocked her family even more. Annie's long blonde hair had been cut after her death. Her family later said nobody had informed them this would happen, and they couldn't understand why it had been done or why her hair had been discarded instead of returned with the body. As they continued looking into the case, more inconsistencies began to appear. According to the family, access to important evidence became increasingly difficult. Requests for tissue samples were denied, parts of the investigation remained unavailable, and some official documents were heavily redacted. Then came another strange discovery. After gaining access to Annie's email account, her family found that every email had been deleted. Around the same time, one of Annie's closest friends, Maria Jensen, began trying to reconstruct Annie's final days by checking her phone records. What she found made even less sense. Several people clearly remembered speaking with Annie shortly before her death, yet police stated there were no records of incoming or outgoing calls during her final days. Maria also claimed that calls she had made to Annie throughout 2005 seemed to have disappeared from the phone company's records. When she tried to ask questions, she said she got no clear answers. Not long afterward, Maria began receiving silent phone calls. Someone would call, wait for her to answer, and then say nothing before hanging up. Whether those calls were connected to Annie's case has never been established. But to Maria, they felt like an attempt to intimidate her. Among the various theories about Annie's death, one of the most debated involves a possible connection to the CIA. Some researchers later proposed that Annie might have been mistaken for an American journalist with a very similar name, Kristina Borjesson. Annie's full name was Annie Kristina Borjesson, and the resemblance between their names has fueled speculation that the two may somehow have been confused. Notably, Kristina Borjesson had reportedly passed through Prestwick Airport just 7 weeks before Annie's death. At the time, Borjesson was investigating the CIA's Extraordinary Rendition Program, a covert system in which terrorism suspects were transported between countries outside normal legal procedures, and in some cases, transferred to secret prisons where they were tortured. According to this theory, the man who introduced himself as Martin Leslie may never have been interested in Annie herself. If the theory is true, his job would have been to identify the right person, but instead, he may have approached someone who only happened to share a similar name. There is no public evidence proving that this happened, and no official investigation has ever supported the theory. But supporters point to a series of unanswered questions. Who was the man pretending to be Martin Leslie? Why were parts of the investigation withheld from her family? Officially, Annie Börjesson's death is still classified as suicide. Her family has never accepted that conclusion and continues to campaign for a new investigation. Whether Annie took her own life, became the victim of a crime, or was caught up in something far bigger than anyone realized, perhaps one day we'll finally know the truth. What do you think really happened to Annie Börjesson? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.